By 1935, two-thirds of all Mississippi sharecroppers earned less than $200 a year in cash. Many earned nothing once the landowner finished the books at year end. Number 7 was a dish the USDA documented in Sunflower County in 1938. Number 14 appears in over 400 WPA Federal Writers Project interviews. Number 22 was the meal Fannie Lou Hamer remembered as the youngest of 20 children. These 25 dishes were not the soul food a Jackson restaurant serves today. They were what your kin ate on a credit slip that never zeroed out, food a family built from a furniture store account that ran 18% interest before the cotton even bloomed. The part few people talk about is how every dish on this list was a quiet act of refusal. Hit that subscribe button. Here are the 25 forgotten soul foods sharecroppers actually ate in 1930s Mississippi. Number 25, hot water cornmeal cakes. A cup of cornmeal, a pinch of salt, boiling water poured in until the meal turned into a thick paste. That was the whole recipe. A sharecropper's wife would scoop the paste into her palm, flatten it, and drop it into a cast iron skillet slick with bacon grease. The cakes hissed and crusted in under 3 minutes. Children ate them, standing up before walking the cotton row at sunrise. Hot water cornbread was the breakfast that did not need eggs, did not need milk, did not need anything the landowner controlled at the furniture store. You could make it with what you already had. A grandmother in Tallahatchie County made these every single morning of her working life from 1928 to 1962. Not because they were beautiful, because they were always possible. Back then, they were the meal you could rely on when the cupboard had given up everything else. Your grandmother called it breakfast. Number 24, salt pork and field peas. The Brer Rabbit molasses tin sat on the same shelf as the salt pork bucket in most sharecropper kitchens of the 1930s. Field peas, sometimes called crowders or whippoorwills, were a tradition passed down from the old days, grown on the edge of the cotton patch where the landowner did not bother to count rows. A woman would simmer a handful of dried peas with a chunk of salt pork all afternoon while the fire burned low. The pork rendered into the broth. The peas softened into a thick, smoky stew. By dusk, the whole cabin smelled like Sunday dinner, even if it was a Tuesday in August. Field peas fed sharecropper families through the lean weeks between cotton chopping in June and cotton picking in September. They were planted in the spaces between the cash crop. They were grown on land nobody else wanted, and they kept your great-grandparents alive when the furniture account had nothing left to give. They were following a memory. Number 23, Potlikker poured over cornbread. Potlikker was the broth left behind after greens cooked down for 2 hours with a piece of fatback. Most white kitchens of the era poured it down the drain. In a sharecropper kitchen, it was the meal. A wedge of crumbled cornbread went into a tin cup. The dark green liquid, thick with iron and pork fat, was ladled over the top. You ate it with a spoon, sopping every drop. The greens themselves came second. The liquor came first. WPA interviewers in 1938 noted that black children in the Delta often had stronger blood iron levels than their white neighbors. The home economists at the USDA traced it back to this single habit. Nothing was wasted. The juice was more nourishing than the leaf. If you grew up with a kitchen that poured its Potlikker over your cornbread, you know exactly what dignity tasted like. That mattered more than any cookbook ever explained. Number 22, molasses poured over a hot biscuit. This was the dish Fannie Lou Hamer remembered from her childhood on the W.D. Marlowe farm in Sunflower County, Mississippi, where she was born in 1917. Her mother would bake biscuits before dawn using flour bought on credit from the furnish store. A jar of dark sorghum or brer, rabbit molasses, sat in the middle of the table. Each child got one biscuit, split open, with a slow stream of molasses poured into the center. The molasses softened the crumb. The biscuit caught the syrup. That was supper for a child too young to chop cotton. Hamer was the youngest of 20 siblings. Her family worked land they did not own and ate food the landowner counted against their share. Back then, by the time you turned 6, you were picking cotton beside your mother. The biscuit and molasses was the meal she remembered for the rest of her life, all the way to her death in 1977. Number 21, sweet potato pone. Sweet potatoes were a traditional sharecropper crop because they yielded heavy on poor soil and stored well in a dirt cellar through the winter. A woman would grate raw sweet potato into a bowl, stir in cornmeal, a spoon of sorghum, and a little buttermilk if she had any. The mixture went into a hot cast iron skillet and baked beside the fire until the top crusted dark brown. The inside stayed soft and almost custard-like. Sweet potato pone was Sunday after church food in a kitchen that did not have sugar, butter, or eggs. It tasted like dessert because the sweet potato did the work no other ingredient could afford to do. A woman served it to her kin on a chipped plate with a glass of cold buttermilk, and that single slice could keep you full all afternoon. Children waited all week for it. It was a hug and a bowl when the bowl had almost nothing in it. Number 20, hoe cake. The name came from the field. A sharecropper working a cotton row would bring a small ball of cornmeal dough wrapped in a piece of cloth. At noon, when the sun made the rows shimmer, you would build a small fire at the edge of the field, scrape the blade of your hoe clean against your pants, and bake the cake right there on the iron. The hoe cake was thin, crisp on the edges, soft in the middle, and tasted of wood smoke and metal. It was the lunch a man ate alone in the cotton, 10 miles from the cabin, with no time to walk back. Across Bolivar County and Coahoma County during the Depression, men who chopped cotton from before sunrise to after sundown lived on hoe cakes and well water for weeks at a time during the 1934 harvest. The blade fed the man who pushed it. That was enough. Number 19, fried catfish from the Muddy Bayou. A retired sharecropper from Tallahatchie County, an old-timer named Robert Anderson, told a WPA interviewer in 1938 that the river fed his family every Friday for 11 straight years. He set trot lines in the bayou before he walked to the field at sunrise. By dusk, when he came back through the trees, 3 or 4 catfish were waiting on the line. His wife rolled them in cornmeal seasoned with salt and a pinch of black pepper. The cast iron skillet, slick with bacon grease, accepted them whole. The catfish hissed and turned dark gold in 8 minutes. The skin crisped, the flesh inside flaked sweet and clean. Friday night supper was a plate of fish, a wedge of cornbread, and a glass of well water. The river belonged to everyone and no one. The trot line cost almost nothing. And for a family that lived on credit, a free supper was a quiet kind of dignity that the furnished ledger could never touch. You ate slow, you picked the bones clean, you went to bed full. Number 18, possum stewed with sweet potatoes. Possum hunting was a winter tradition across the Delta for decades, from November through February. Men would walk the woods after the first frost with a coon dog and a kerosene lantern. The meat was greasy and gamey and needed a long simmer with sweet potatoes to soften the flavor. A sharecropper's wife would parboil the possum twice to render the fat, then bake it slow with sweet potato chunks until the meat fell from the bone. The dish was not pretty, it was not refined, it was wild meat stretched with garden starch, feeding a cabin that had no chicken left in the yard. Possum and sweet potatoes appeared in Christmas suppers across Sunflower County right through the 1930s, all the way to the start of World War II. Your kin hunted it. The cabin cooked it. Your great aunts remembered the taste for 60 years. It was the meal that said the woods will provide what the landowner will not. Number 17, smothered squirrel with brown gravy. Boys as young as 9 carried single-shot rifles into the river bottom on Saturday mornings to bring home meat. A pair of squirrels was a good day. Their mother would skin them, joint them, dredge the pieces in flour, and brown them in bacon grease. Then she added water, more flour, and a little salt and let the gravy thicken slow over a low fire. The squirrel meat turned tender. The gravy went the color of dark earth. She poured the whole pot over rice or cornbread or whatever. Starch was on the shelf. Smothered squirrel was the dinner that turned a boy's marksmanship into a family's protein. Across Bolivar County in 1936, hunting for the pot was not a hobby. It was the difference between a child going to bed full and a child waking up hungry. The forests of the Mississippi Delta had been hunted clean for 2 centuries by the time the Great Depression came. By the 1930s, a single squirrel was a small miracle. A woman named Lula in Mound Bayou kept the pelts and tanned them for winter mittens. Nothing was thrown out. Not the bones, not the fur, not the broth. Imagine your own kitchen tonight, throwing nothing away for 30 years straight. That was the genius of sharecropping cooking. A 2-pound animal fed a family of 7 and clothed 2 children's hands for a whole winter. The rifle moved from father to son. The cook saved the bones for soup the next day. This was not cuisine, this was engineering. Number 16, poke salad greens. Poke grew wild on the edges of the cotton field in early spring between March and April. The young leaves had to be picked before they turned because the mature plant was poisonous. A sharecropper's wife knew the exact week to harvest. She would boil the leaves twice, pouring off the first water, then saute them in bacon grease with a little salt and a splash of vinegar. The result was a tender, slightly bitter green that tasted like spinach mixed with something older and stranger. Poke salad was the first fresh food of the year after a long winter of nothing but dried beans and cornmeal. In those days, children remembered the day the poke came up the way other children remembered Christmas. You walked out behind the cabin with a basket and a sharp knife. You picked only the young leaves. It was free. It was abundant. It was the green that broke the gray season open. Number 15, lamb's quarters and duck greens. These were the forage greens that cost nothing and grew everywhere a sharecropper looked. Lamb's quarters came up in the disturbed soil at the edge of plowed rows. Doc pushed up along the dirt roads between cabins. An elder in Coahoma County, born in 1875, could walk 50 yards from her front porch and bring back a basket of greens for supper. She washed them 3 times in well water to get the field dust out. Then they went into a pot with a piece of fatback and simmered until the bitterness cooked out. The greens turned a deep, almost black green. The potlikker turned thick. Foraging filled the gap between what the landowner allowed in the garden and what a family of 9 actually needed to eat. The fields belonged to the planter. The roadsides belonged to whoever knew how to look. She knew every weed by name, knew which would feed you and which would kill you, and she taught her daughter before that daughter could read. Number 14, crackling bread. Crackling bread is a stat-worthy dish. The 1935 USDA Bureau of Home Economics survey of 198 black tenant families in the Mississippi Delta documented that 92% of households made some version of crackling bread at least once a week. The cracklings, the crisp bits of fat and skin left after rendering hog lard, were stirred into cornmeal batter and baked in a hot iron skillet. The bread came out studded with crunchy pork, salty and rich, with a corn crumb that broke apart at a touch. A wedge of crackling bread with a glass of buttermilk was a full supper in a sharecropper cabin. The USDA researchers noted that this single dish provided more usable calories per penny than any factory-made food they could find on a Mississippi shelf in 1935. The data lined up with what every cook already knew. The hog gave its fat. The fat gave its cracklings. The cracklings went into the bread, and the bread fed the family. Number 13, sorghum syrup poured over cathead biscuits. Sorghum cane grew on small patches of land that the landowner had no use for. In late October of every year, sharecropping families would gather to press the cane through a mule-drawn mill and boil the green juice down for hours over an open fire until it turned into thick, dark syrup. A jar of fresh sorghum was the closest thing to a luxury most black tenant families ever owned. On Sunday morning, a woman named Pearl in Greenville would bake biscuits the size of her fists, split them open, and pour sorghum into the steaming center. The biscuit absorbed the syrup. The syrup mineralized the bread. Children ate them slow, licking their fingers between bites. Sorghum was sweetness that nobody owed the planter. It was sugar made on the land you worked with the labor of your own kin. That mattered. Number 12, black-eyed peas with rice. Hoppin' John was an ancient dish by the 1930s, born on the South Carolina coast and passed down through the Great Migration after 1916. In the Mississippi Delta, sharecroppers made it on New Year's Day for luck, but they also made it on any cold Tuesday when the cupboard was nearly bare. Dried black-eyed peas simmered with a ham hock for 3 hours. Then a cup of long-grain rice was stirred in to absorb the broth. The result was a one-pot supper that fed 7 people for under 15 cents in 1934 money. The peas brought protein. The rice brought bulk. The ham hock brought soul. Hoppin' John was the meal that connected a Sunflower County kitchen to a kitchen on the Sea Islands 400 miles east. The same beans, the same rice, the same memory passed down across the long line of black hands. If you make it tonight, you are eating what your great-great-grandmother ate on the night the year turned over. Number 11, hog jowl simmered with turnip greens. New Year's tradition or not, hog jowl was a regular sharecropper supper through the cold months from October to March. The cured pork cheek was tough, salty, and slow cooking. A sharecropper's wife would simmer it for 2 hours in a heavy pot, then add a mountain of fresh turnip greens from the garden. The greens cooked down to a quarter of their volume. The jowl rendered its salt and fat into the pot. The result was a tangle of dark, savory greens shot through with rich pork, a tin cup of cornbread on the side, a glass of cold buttermilk to wash it down. Hog jowl and greens was the supper that filled a cabin with steam and warmth on a January night when the wind came across the cotton field with nothing to stop it. Across the Delta, this dish was associated with a single phrase, passed from mother to daughter since the late 1800s. Eat your greens for money, eat your jowl for luck, eat your cornbread to soak it all up. That was the whole philosophy of a sharecropper New Year. It was not superstition. It was thrift dressed up in tradition. The greens were the cheapest fresh food in the cabin garden. The jowl was the cheapest cut of the hog. The cornbread was the cheapest grain on a shelf. 3 nothings stacked together became a feast. A woman named Sally Mae in Indianola, born in 1882, would set a plate for every child, every cousin who showed up at her door. Nobody walked away hungry. Nobody walked away without a story. If you sat at her table, you remember it now. The smell of greens, the slap of cornbread on a plate, the clink of a buttermilk glass. This was the meal that made a kitchen the center of a family for 50 years. Number 10, chicken feet stew. The yard hens that scratched in the dust outside a sharecropper's cabin were too valuable to kill for meat. They laid eggs that the family ate or sold at the country store for 2 cents a piece. But once a year, when a hen stopped laying, she went into the pot, and every part went in. The feet, scrubbed and blanched and peeled of their yellow skin, simmered with onion and a pinch of salt for 3 hours until the cartilage turned soft and gelatinous. The broth thickened on its own. The feet flavored everything they touched. A bowl of chicken feet, stew over rice, was the supper that wasted nothing. It was the meal that said, this animal fed us in life, and now it feeds us in death, and not one bone gets thrown away. Mothers taught daughters how to clean the feet, scald them, peel the yellow skin off in one practice motion. That was years of knowledge in a single gesture. Number 9, cornmeal mush with fatback. This was breakfast in a hurry. A handful of cornmeal stirred into boiling salted water until it thickened into a soft porridge. A small piece of fatback sliced thin and crisped in a separate pan. The mush went into a bowl. The fatback went on top. The grease melted into the mush. Children ate it before walking to the cotton row or the rural schoolhouse when the school year ran short between picking seasons in October and April. Cornmeal mush kept a working body fueled until noon dinner. It used the cheapest grain in the South and the cheapest cut of the hog. A woman named Bessie Lee in Mound Bayou cooked this 5 mornings a week for 30 years, from 1922 to 1952. Her grandchildren remembered the smell of fatback hitting hot iron the way other children remembered the sound of a school bell. If you ate her mush as a child, you remember the way it sat warm in your stomach, all the way to lunchtime. Number 8, buttermilk poured over cold cornbread. After supper, a wedge of leftover cornbread went into a tin cup. A ladle of buttermilk from the morning's churning went over the top. You broke the bread up with a spoon and ate it like cereal. The tang of the buttermilk balanced the corn. The bread softened into a creamy, mineral-rich porridge. This was bedtime food in a sharecropper cabin. It was the snack a tired father ate on the porch after a 14-hour day in the field. It was the supper a woman ate alone, sitting at her kitchen table with her work apron still on after every child had gone to bed. Cornbread and buttermilk was the dish that needed no fire, no preparation, and almost no time. It was the meal you could make when you had nothing left to give. It was the meal a Bolivar County widow ate the night her own mother died in 1934, because grief did not change the fact that her body still needed food, and it kept Mississippi sharecroppers alive through nights too tired for cooking. That was enough. Number 7, watermelon rind preserves. Picture a sharecropper's wife in late August of 1936, sitting on the back porch of a cabin in Bolivar County with a pile of watermelon rinds beside her on a piece of newspaper. She has just finished feeding 11 people the red flesh of the melon. The rinds, thick and pale green, would have been thrown to the hogs in any other house. In her kitchen, they become preserves. She peels the dark skin off, cubes the white flesh, and simmers it for hours with sorghum syrup, a few cloves, and a slice of lemon if the country store has any in stock. By dusk, the rinds have turned translucent and amber. She ladles them into glass jars she has saved all year long, washed and stacked beside the stove. The preserves will sweeten biscuits all winter. The sound of the iron pot bubbling on the wood stove is the sound of a kitchen turning trash into treasure. This is what the WPA Federal Writers Project documented again and again across the Delta in interview after interview from 1936 to 1938. Black women turning what white kitchens threw away into food that lasted 6 months. Watermelon rind preserves were not a Southern eccentricity. They were a survival technology. A jar on the shelf in February meant a child got a sweet bite when the cabin had nothing else to offer. She knew which year the jars were canned just by looking at the color. They were following a memory. Number 6, pig ear sandwiches between 2 slices of light bread. The pig ear was tough, gristly, and almost free at the country store, where the cuts white folks would not buy went for pennies on the back shelf. A sharecropper's wife boiled the ears for 3 hours with onion, salt, and a splash of vinegar. They came out tender, smoky, and dark. She sliced them thin and stacked them between 2 slices of soft white bread, sometimes with a smear of mustard if a jar was on the shelf. Pig ear sandwiches were the lunch a working man carried in his overalls pocket out to the field at dawn. They were the meal a mother packed for a son who walked 5 miles to the schoolhouse in 1935. Cheap, filling, honest. Across Sunflower County, the pig ear sandwich was the lunch that built whole families. Your great uncle ate one every workday for 40 years and never once complained. Number 5, souse meat. After a winter hog killing in November or December, every part of the animal had to be preserved before the warm weather came. Souse meat was the technique for using the head, the feet, and the tongue. A sharecropper's wife would simmer all of it together for 6 hours with vinegar, salt, black pepper, and a few hot peppers from the garden. The meat fell off the bone. The broth thickened with natural gelatin. She poured the whole mixture into a pan and chilled it overnight on the back porch in the cold air. By morning, the stews had set into a cold, savory loaf studded with bits of pork. Sliced thin, it went on cornbread or saltine crackers as a Sunday afternoon snack. Stews meat was the dish that proved a black cook could turn a hog's head into a delicacy. Nothing wasted, everything used. That was the gospel of sharecropper cooking, written nowhere and remembered by every kitchen. Number 4, neck bones simmered with potatoes. Neck bones were the cheapest pork at the furniture store, costing about 10 cents a pound in 1936. A few cents bought enough for a family of 8. A sharecropper's wife dropped the bones into a heavy pot with cold water, salt, a halved onion, and a few peppercorns. She simmered them for 2 hours until the meat clung loose to the bones. Then she added quartered potatoes and let the pot go another 40 minutes. The potatoes soaked up the rich, salty broth. The neck bone meat shredded into the gravy. A bowl of neck bones and potatoes was the supper that warmed the cabin on a wet February evening when the cotton field was a sea of mud and the fire was the only good thing in the room. Children sucked the marrow out of the bones. Nothing left on your plate. That was the whole recipe. A Mississippi cook served it without apology and ate it without shame. Number 3, parched cornmeal coffee. By the late 1930s, real coffee from Brazil was a luxury most black tenant families could not justify on the furnish account. A pound of Maxwell House cost $0.25 in 1937, when a sharecropper's whole week of cash earnings might be $1.50. So Delta cooks improvised. They spread cornmeal in a dry cast iron skillet and roasted it slow over a low fire until it turned dark brown and smelled like burnt toast. The parched meal got steeped in boiling water, strained through a piece of clean flour sack, and poured into a tin cup. The result tasted vaguely like coffee, vaguely like roasted grain, and entirely like a kitchen that refused to give up its morning ritual. Cornmeal coffee was poor man coffee, but it was hot, and it was the morning's first comfort. That mattered when the day ahead was 12 hours in a cotton row. She drank it standing up at the stove before the sun came up over the field. Number 2, pickled pig feet from the country store jar. By 1938, the country stores across the Delta carried glass jars of pickled pig feet on the back shelf, sold for $0.05 each. They came in a brine of vinegar, salt, and a few red peppers. A sharecropper walking home from the field on a Saturday evening might trade a few coppers for one. He ate it on the porch, slow, with a piece of cold cornbread, while the sun went down over the cotton. The vinegar bit. The pork was soft and gelatinous. The bones, picked clean, went to the yard dog. Pickled pig feet were the small reward at the end of a long week. They were the meal a grown man ate alone with his hat off and his work shirt unbuttoned while the cicadas started up in the trees. They were proof that a hard day could end with something almost like dinner. He earned that one nickel and chose this. That choice was its own kind of freedom. Number 1, tea cakes from the lard tin. Compare a tea cake to a modern store-bought cookie, and the difference is everything that ever mattered. A factory cookie comes in a plastic sleeve made by a machine, eaten without ceremony. A Mississippi tea cake was a dense, crumbly, slightly dry round cookie made from flour, lard, sorghum, and a pinch of soda. She baked them on Saturdays in a wood-fired oven and stored them in an empty armor lard tin on the top shelf of the cupboard. Each child got one after Sunday dinner, just one, and you made it last the whole walk home from church, breaking pieces off slow. The tea cake was not a treat, it was a sacrament. A factory cookie costs more than $2,026 and gets eaten without a thought. A tea cake from the lard tin in 1936 cost almost nothing and got remembered for 8 decades. That gap is the whole story of sharecropper food. Cheap ingredients, long memory. A woman named Mattie Lou in Indianola handed the lard tin to her daughter in 1958, who handed it to hers in 1984 until the tin itself became holy. That was the whole recipe. Your grandmother called it Sunday. Today, a soul food restaurant in Jackson serves crackling bread for $14 a basket and calls it traditional. Number 18, mustard greens with vinegar. A cook in Macon in 1962 finished her pot the same way her own mother had finished it in 1898. She shook a bottle of cider vinegar over the top 3 times, no measuring, and let the splash fall through the simmer. The vinegar was not for flavor alone. The acid pulled the calcium out of the leaf in a form your body could absorb, the same way lemon juice does in Mediterranean cooking. By 1992, the dish was banned from low-fat cookbooks. The fat was the problem, the editors said. The fat was the reason families were getting sick. By 2024, the same combination, fat plus greens plus acid, was being recommended in cardiology newsletters as a calcium absorption strategy. The cook in Macon was not in the newsletter. Her pot did not get cited. 3 centuries of that splash of vinegar in that pot, and the science arrived 3 centuries late. Your aunt still cooks it the same way. Her pot doesn't need a citation. Number 23, Brunswick stew. This was the meal that fed entire churches on a Sunday afternoon. The original came out of Virginia in the 1820s, and by the time it reached black communities across the Deep South, it had become something different, something better. A senior would take whatever meat was on sale, usually chicken thighs at 39 cents a pound, and drop them in a pot with canned tomatoes, corn, lima beans, potatoes, and a splash of vinegar. 2 hours of simmering and the chicken fell apart into a thick, smoky broth. One batch made enough for 4 days. A woman named Lucille Harper in Savannah, Georgia, made Brunswick stew every other week for 14 years after her husband died in 1969. She never measured a thing. She said your hands know what a pot needs if you've been cooking long enough. The truth is, it belonged to whoever needed a cheap meal that tasted like someone loved them. Number 25, buttermilk and cornbread, crumble. This was the meal that closed the day. A glass of cold buttermilk, a square of leftover cornbread, broken into it with your fingers, a spoon to eat it like cereal. In black households across the rural South, this was supper. Not a side dish, not a snack, the meal. After a day of picking cotton or walking 2 miles to a church that had no fans, a grandmother crumbled cornbread into a jelly glass of buttermilk and ate it slow. The buttermilk was tangy enough to wake your mouth. The cornbread softened but did not dissolve. It cost almost nothing because the buttermilk came from the churn and the cornbread was already made. A woman in Albany, Georgia, told her granddaughter she had eaten this meal more than 1,000 times in her life. She never tired of it. That was not a meal. That was a relationship. Number 25, lard fried chicken, a cast iron skillet on a wood stove in Greenville, Mississippi, holding 3 inches of pork fat the grandmother had rendered herself from a shoulder trim that morning. She strained it through cheesecloth into a tin she kept behind the stove, the same tin her own mother had used. The thighs went in skin down, sizzling so loud she could not hear the radio. She fried them slow, never rushed, until the skin shattered like glass when you bit into it. The kitchen smelled like sizzle and smoke and Sunday afternoon. On Sundays after church, the family ate it standing in the kitchen because there were not enough chairs and nobody minded. Then, in 1977, a Senate report told her to stop. Lard was the new enemy. Switch to soybean oil, cottonseed oil. Anything but the fat that had fed her people through 2 world wars. She didn't switch. By the time researchers in 2010 admitted lard had no real link to heart disease, she had been gone 12 years. Her recipe was already in her granddaughter's hand. Number 19, pinto beans and ham. A bag of dried pinto beans, a ham hock, an onion, water, salt. That was it. You soaked the beans overnight, dropped everything in a pot the next morning, and let it simmer for 3 or 4 hours until the beans turned creamy and the ham fell apart into shreds. The broth was smoky and thick enough to eat with a spoon. A 1-pound bag cost 49 cents in 1975 and made enough food for 5 days. The ham hock was left over from Sunday dinner, already paid for. A woman in Tupelo, Mississippi, named Hattie Banks, made pinto beans every Monday for 22 years. She said Monday, beans gave the week a rhythm. She said a week without beans was a week without a backbone. The ritual of cooking, the smell filling a quiet house, the act of sitting down and eating something you made yourself. That was not poverty, that was living. Number 22, chitlins with vinegar and hot sauce. The cleaned and slow cooked intestines of a hog, simmered for hours with nothing but water, then dressed with vinegar and hot sauce at the table. The smell announced itself before you opened the door. It traveled through walls and across porches. Chitlins became a dividing line in every black community. If you cooked them, you were country. If you loved them, you were honest about where you came from. The cost was almost nothing because white butchers considered them waste. 5 pounds cost less than $1 through the 1960s. Enslaved people had been given these parts because the enslavers kept the hams and the chops. What was left over became a cuisine. Your grandmother did not see it as leftovers. She saw it as hers. The vinegar cut through the richness. The hot sauce gave it heat. And the woman who cleaned those intestines for 3 hours before they ever touched the pot did it because her family was going to eat tonight. Number 19, turnip greens with stems. The pot took the whole plant. The leafy tops, the bitter stems, the small white roots, all of it together in a heavy iron pot with smoked meat and a splash of cider vinegar at the end. A cook in Tuskegee in 1955 stood over that pot for hours, lifting the lid every so often, adjusting the heat with the air vent on the wood stove. She didn't have a peer-reviewed paper to wave around. She had a heavy pot, a smoked turkey wing, and 40 years of doing it the way her mother did it. The 1985 dietary climate told families to skip greens cooked in fat and reach for raw salads instead. What that advice missed is that the fat is what unlocks the carotenoids in the leaf. The pot in Tuskegee already knew. It had been doing the work for centuries, and it kept working the day the chart was published, and it kept working the day the chart was retired. Number 23, peach cobbler. A can of peaches, a cup of batter made from flour and sugar and milk, and butter melted in the baking dish. You poured the batter in first, spooned the peaches on top, and the batter rose around the fruit as it baked. A can of peaches cost 19 cents in 1955. The batter cost less than a dime. In the church basements of black congregations across the South, peach cobbler appeared at every supper and every funeral repast. Church, women competed over their cobbler, whose crust was crispier, whose filling held together when you cut it. A woman's reputation could rise or fall on a single pan. That cobbler was not a dessert, it was a credential. The women who made the best ones never wrote the recipe down. They carried it in their hands. Number 20, potlikker from collards. A heavy iron pot full of dark green leaves, a smoked turkey wing at the bottom, water to cover, simmered 3 hours until the leaves had given up everything they had. The broth at the bottom of that pot was nearly black, slick with fat and soft with iron. A cook in Charleston ladled it into a coffee mug and drank it standing at the stove. Children sopped it up with cornbread. Nobody threw a single drop away. Most of the soluble vitamins and minerals from the greens leach into that liquid. More vitamin K in 1 cup than your daily multivitamin used to deliver. White nutritionists in the 1970s called it pot juice and threw it down the drain. Black households strained it and saved it. They were right. They were right about the leaves, right about the broth, and right about every warning that told them to stop. The same cup she drank from a mason jar in 1962 now sells in Brooklyn juice bars for $9. Number 24, tripe and hominy stew. Most people today wouldn't touch tripe, but for black seniors who grew up in the rural South, tripe was a gift. A pound of honeycomb tripe cost 29 cents in 1972. A can of hominy cost a dime. You cleaned the tripe, cut it into strips, and simmered it with the hominy, onions, garlic, a bay leaf, and water. 4 hours turned the tripe tender and rich. The hominy swelled into a stew that stuck to your bones and didn't ask for anything else beside it. A retired hog farmer outside Macon, Georgia, ate this every Saturday for 9 years after his wife passed. He made it the way she taught him. He said the smell of it simmering was the closest thing he had to her being in the room. Nobody wrote it in a cookbook. It kept a man fed and whole when the house felt too empty to bear. Number 24, crackling cornbread. The skillet came out of the oven roaring. The crust cracked open over a layer of crisp pork bits that had been pressed into stone ground cornmeal an hour before. A cook in Tuscaloosa would save the cracklings from rendering lard, never throw them out, and fold them cold into the batter so they kept their crunch through the bake. The bread sat on the table beside greens and a pot of beans. Children grabbed it before the grown folks sat down. For decades, 1990s, dietitians counted only the fat grams and called the bread dangerous. They did not count the corn. They did not count the pork skin, which is roughly 30% collagen. They did not count the way a child finished a plate when there was a slab of crackling bread on it. Today, the same cracklings sit on the shelves of your local health food store for $14 a bag. The skillet always knew. The chart took 30 years to catch up. Number 22, butterbean succotash pot. Butter beans were the quiet backbone of Black Southern cooking. They were cheap. They kept for months dried, and they turned creamy when you cooked them low and slow. A senior would soak a cup of dried butter beans overnight, then simmer them the next day with corn cut off the cob, a piece of salt pork, onions, and a little water. 2 hours later, the beans had broken down into a thick, starchy stew that did not need a single other dish beside it. In the 1950s, a bag of dried butter beans cost 15 cents and fed a person for a week. The salt pork was often left over from another meal already paid for. A retired seamstress in Natchez, Mississippi, ate butterbean succotash 4 nights a week for 7 years. She grew the beans herself in a garden behind her house until her knees gave out in 1978. After that, she bought them dried from the corner store and never complained about the difference. The meal didn't change. Her body did. The pot didn't care. In 1935, a Black woman in Sunflower County made the same bread for pennies and fed 9 children on a single skillet. The food has not changed. The dignity of who gets to claim it has. These 25 dishes were never invented for restaurants. They were invented for survival, and they survived because the women who cooked them refused to let anything be wasted, including hope. Tell us in the comments which dish your own family cooked and which one surprised you most. Because remembering a recipe is one thing. Remembering the hands that made it possible is the work of a lifetime.